The first thing I want to do is draw a parallel or a tie between the rise of Formula One in the USA and the current headlines around the decline in popularity of Formula One in America. So over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had overly simplistic headlines like all of these explaining that the rise or the recent rise in popularity of Formula One in America was due to this and this alone, this being Drive to Survive. Now we're getting overly simplistic, clickbaity titles saying that the reason people are leaving the sport or that the sport has plateaued is mostly because of the dominance of Red Bull and Max Verstappen. And I think the two are tied because I think the one has missed an opportunity to truly engage with fans and bring the fans into the sport over the past 4 or 5 years that would ensure that they stick around. By the way, this is no diss at Drive to Survive. I love the series. I think it has done wonders for the sport. What I am angry with is peddling this narrative that Drive to Survive is the sole reason for the growth of Formula One in America is why we've landed in the position that we are in today, where we are now getting stories and headlines of, oh no, people don't actually love Formula One and there's a decline in the numbers and everyone's freaking out. We don't need more documentaries and more docuseries around the sport. What we need is real engagement for the fans. We need the sport to acknowledge the fans and content creators and bring them into the mix because the content creators are the reason why so many fans stuck around and also understood the sport better and kept the fans coming back. So Drive to Survive absolutely deserves credit in breathing new life into a sport that was very much looking like a relic of the past. But I want to argue that Drive to Survive was the spark and not the fuel that enabled the growth of Formula One in America, and a spark that was so desperately needed. It was the spark that prompted people's interest, but it was in no way, shape or form the fuel that kept people coming back to Formula One. And the reason why I care so much about this, and for me it's so important that we look beyond Drive to Survive, is because we are actually missing all of the important reasons and things at play that have made Formula One incredibly popular. If we put way too much emphasis and weight on one thing, like we have done with Drive to Survive, we are missing all of these other opportunities to truly engage with the fans and keep them into the sport and keep them entertained and interested and engaged with the sport. Which, by the way, is where we are right now. Formula One has missed a massive opportunity to engage with all of these elements. And what are these elements? This is what I keep referring to as the perfect storm. It's important to note that the first season of Drive to Survive happened before the pandemic in 2019, and it wasn't actually that popular. Then the pandemic happened and we were all stuck at home dying for live sports content which we weren't getting, and entertainment and events. And hence the popularity of Drive to Survive happened and people started binging season 2, but also went back and watched season 1 of Drive to Survive. So we had Drive to Survive, yes, but it existed before the pandemic. We also had the rise of TikTok and the creator economy. And both of these are two really important points that are never discussed. The first one is the rise of TikTok. TikTok completely changed the way that we interacted with one another, that we consumed content and entertainment. And then came the boom of the creator economy that happened in 2020. That rise of content creators, of people leaving well-established organizations. We saw this a lot with journalists leaving big media conglomerates to go out on their own, create their own newsletter, create their own news channel. And that is so important because had Formula One engaged with content creators over the past 4 or 5 years, they would have been able to tap into all of these new communities. And this is the key. So yes, Drive to Survive was the spark that got a lot of people interested. But those people that then got interested wondered how to get involved with the sport. What happens to people when they watch Drive to Survive? Where do they go next? What is that funnel of engagement? Because the jump from watching Drive to Survive to being an avid F1 fan that tunes in every day, especially during a pandemic where the races weren't happening, there's a massive gap in between when nothing is happening. And it's also time that we paid attention to all of these other components and acknowledge and give credit to all of these content creators who have enabled the growth of the sport and played a huge role in it. Ask anyone and they will probably mention Drive to Survive. They will also caveat that, if you give them the time and the opportunity to do so, with naming a handful of content creators, whether it's podcasters, newsletter writers, TikTokers, YouTubers, you name it, who've brought them into the fold and made them feel welcome as a fan. And by the way, this narrative that Drive to Survive created this growth and popularity of Formula One in America is starting to feel like really lazy journalism, especially when the numbers show a completely different story. So let's look at the numbers. Let's look at the Nielsen reports. The numbers tell a story of a show that was successful, but that wasn't bringing in the types of numbers that would allow for the type of growth that we've been seeing in America over the last couple of years. Here's a great story from someone that I respect who digs into the ratings and the Nielsen reports and the entertainment piece. And read this piece here. So he's talking about how viewership, especially TV viewership of Formula One, has gone up in the recent years. Absolutely true. No one's arguing this. But he says this, the only thing holding me from going all in on this theory that it's all due and all tied back to Drive to Survive is that the ratings were surprisingly shallow in the Nielsen reports. Formula One Drive to Survive only made it to the top 10 list for 1 week in the Nielsen report, with a low 4 million hours viewed, which is not a lot for a really popular TV show. These 4 million hours viewed, that alone cannot justify the incredible growth that Formula One has had. Another thing worth mentioning is there are so many sports documentaries out there, and most of them are a little blip. Most of them aren't actually that popular. They are obviously incredibly popular with the people who are fans of a certain sport. There's a reason why I gravitated towards Drive to Survive and watched it. I enjoy the sport. I enjoy the stories around the sport. But it is wrong to think that these types of shows are incredibly popular. There are obviously some exceptions. The Beckham documentary, the Last Dance documentary. But it's interesting how in our world of Formula One, Drive to Survive keeps coming up. Here's another graph. If you look at Drive to Survive versus the top documentaries, you see how small those Drive to Survive numbers are. Again, something else worth repeating is the show did not make it to the Nielsen's top 10 in 2023 or 2022. I'm hoping that this showcases just how this simplistic narrative of Drive to Survive is wrong and a mistake and will get us in trouble. The trouble that we are in right now, which is the sport is plateauing and everyone is scratching their head going, wait, how did we get here? I thought we were doing incredibly well. So this year, ABC announced that they already saw a massive drop in viewership. ABC apparently lost a staggering 25% of its audience in 2023 this year compared to 2022. A very simplistic and quite false narrative that most people are peddling right now, that the media is peddling, is everyone's bored. Everyone's bored of Max Verstappen's dominance and Red Bull's dominance, and basically there's nothing more to see here. And I actually already said last year that yes, the sport was absolutely going to plateau, and it was already going to start at the start of 2023, and it was going to continue to do so, if not decline in 2024. The reason I said this was because the sport hadn't done nearly enough to engage with all of the new fans coming in. One perfect example of this is through the last year and a half, the sport and the team principals have been tapping themselves on the shoulder and saying what an incredibly good job they have done, because look at how young, global, and female this new audience is. But they have done nothing to actually cater and engage with this young female fandom. You can't simultaneously want the relevancy and the economic power of a whole new segment of fandoms and then not give them something back in return. You can't just take their money and their viewership and their eyeballs and not listen to them when they tell you that there are things missing in the sport. And so many other sports in America especially have figured this out, whether it's football, whether it's the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, have all figured out that partnering with influencers and content creators is just another way of tapping into different target audiences they might not directly have access to. Paramount is a perfect example of a media company that has fully understood this, but so is the NFL. Look at what Destroying is doing right now on his own YouTube channel and in direct partnership with the sport. And by the way, it's such a shame because Formula One, compared to the NFL, compared to the NBA, have a much younger audience, with the average age being 32, as opposed to 42 or 50 years old. So no, Max Verstappen is not the reason that F1 is no longer growing in America. And blaming both Max Verstappen and Red Bull, in my opinion, is a cop-out. And what's really a shame is this could have been avoided. And it actually can still be avoided. Because how can we not be excited about the sport right now? We're witnessing one of the greatest drivers that this sport has ever seen. We're witnessing engineering prowess of a team who built a car so fast that everyone is scratching their heads and trying to figure out how the hell they built this thing. And finally, based on all the new regulations that came in, we are finally witnessing some incredible wheel-to-wheel action on track. But it's not happening between the number 1 and 2 and the rest of the field. It's happening in the midfield battles. And they are brilliant. But these are the stories and the narratives that we need to share and tell, especially when we're talking to newer fans. I go back to lazy journalism. We like to simplify things before we fully understand them. And this is where we get to a media problem, which is the echo chambers. Someone hears something, we have an anecdote, and we just keep running with this. And of course we keep hearing Drive to Survive mentioned Because when you look at the 70 years of the sport, it is probably one of the biggest changes that happened most recently, but it also happened at a time of growth of social media, of growth of content creators, and it is so much easier to understand than, for example, the very complex deal of Liberty Media or the very complex deals of ESPN and how that partnership has grown over the years. We like simplistic stories and we hold on to them. So hopefully with all of this, I give you a little understanding of why context is so important. The pandemic happened. Everyone was looking for ways to engage with the live events and sports that they were missing. We had the creator boom and the creator economy absolutely take off. We had the rise of TikTok, especially in America, as a very, very popular social app where everyone was spending a lot of their time. In terms related directly to Formula One, we obviously had new owners with Liberty Media, and we also had the ESPN deal. There are so many pieces that come together to highlight why something becomes popular and why there is a decline. And when you forget all of the other components and you only focus on one, you miss all of the other attributes that actually help a sport grow. And you miss actually engaging and taking note of all of these pieces, which I think is precisely what has happened right now with Formula One, which is why I do not think it's surprising in any way, shape or form that the sport is going to plateau and somewhat decrease, except if they change a few things and start engaging and focusing on all of these other segments and elements that have helped with the growth of the sport over the last 4 or 5 years. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm getting better at this. Thank you.